Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Urban Update. I'm Byron Barnett. On the show this morning, the first community health center in the U.S. celebrates 50 years. Also on the program, what are the issues facing our homeless population and what the state can do to fight the growing crisis. But up first, last week's terrorist attacks on France have brought to the forefront many complex issues around how the U.S. should respond with the war on terrorism, the resettlement of Syrian refugees, and the kind of alienation that enables radical groups like ISIS to recruit around the world. To give us their personal perspectives on these and other issues, we've invited an interesting panel that consists of Bill Keylor, who is a professor of international relations and history at the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University. Also, award-winning and published photographer Rania Matar, who was in Paris at a book signing just hours before the attacks. Over the past 2 years, she has been photographing the Syrian refugees in Beirut. She is Lebanese, her father is Palestinian, and her 4 kids are Bostonians. Lastly, we have Olivier Appaix. He is born and raised in Paris, and he's an independent international consultant now based in Cambridge, who has also spent time in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Latin America, and can offer some light on the social and political challenges of integration of disenfranchised groups in a country such as France or the U.S. Welcome to Urban Update, everyone. Thank you for coming in. Olivier, let me start with you as a native, as a Parisian. What is your feeling today? Just your general thoughts about what we've been witnessing this past week.
Well, it's profound sadness. This was something that really brought my spirit down a lot, and it's very sad. And also, I was not that much surprised after all, because there had been lots of talks in France about something of that, maybe not of that magnitude, but of that order happening. And there had been a number of foiled attempts, including the one in the TGV, which was curtailed by some U.S. Marines, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Rania, now you were in Paris at your book signing just a couple of hours before the attacks. Could you sort of just give us your take on the immediate aftermath of what you saw, felt, and heard in the city? And
I've sadly lived that many times. I mean, I've lived the civil war in Lebanon, the 2006 attack, the war between Israel and Hezbollah, and then this again. I mean, I was at Paris Photo, and the place was mobbed with people. It was very happy. I was signing my book. I mean, it was a happy moment. And then I was at a party when it happened, and my daughter was at my mother-in-law's apartment in Paris, and there was something very interesting, because the night before we were at a dinner, and I get out of dinner and I have all these texts asking me if my parents are okay in Beirut, and then the next day I'm at a dinner in Paris and I'm getting all these texts asking me if my daughter and I are okay. So there was something extremely disturbing and scary, and I had to juggle the idea: do I stay where I am? Do I go where my daughter is? And I had learned from Lebanon, if you don't leave right away and go home, typically you get stuck. So eventually I was lucky to get a ride, because you can find Ubers or taxis or anything. It was pretty eerie.
I'll bet it was.
And very sad.
Professor Bill Keylor, I mentioned off the top that this has really raised a lot of complex issues. And I guess in your view, what are some of the more important issues that that have brought to the surface by these this shocking terrorist attacks?
Byron, I think France was selected by ISIS for this attack for a number of reasons. Number one, France is the most supportive of all the European countries of the United States' policy in Syria. That is, they participated in the bombing even before this horrific event. Secondly, France is a very secular country, much more than we are. They would not have "In God We Trust" on their coins, or they wouldn't have a chaplain giving an invocation at the French National Assembly. They really believe in a very sharp separation of church and state, which is exactly the opposite from what ISIS stands for. That is the Sharia law being applied to the caliphate. Thirdly, there is the issue of the discontented Muslim minority in France. They're very heavily situated in the suburbs of Paris and other big cities. They're not doing well economically, and they're not as integrated into French society as Muslims are in the United States. So I think that those three issues really go a long way to explain why they chose to hit France in general and Paris in particular.
Olivier, talk to me about how you feel socioeconomics and cultural exclusion and alienation sort of factor into what we're talking about here in Paris.
Yes, it has certainly played a factor. It's not the only one, but it is one of them. Due to the ongoing crisis, but also from the past decades with lingering unemployment and the inefficiency of most of the political policy, the economic policies, this has created a constant bed of not poverty exactly, because there are a number of programs that tend to mediate that, but there is a number of there's a fairly large number of unemployed, and that has mostly affected the less well, let's say the immigrants or their descendants, the poor part of the population, as it is everywhere else, and that has played a role in the disenfranchising them. And there's also a factor of ghettoization. You mentioned that before. There's been a sort of a concentration of this population in certain areas where the original French population, that includes, for example, some of my great-grandfathers and mothers, have moved away from there.
One thing I want to, Rania, maybe I'll start with you. You have actually photographed in Beirut Syrian refugees. I want to talk a little bit here from everyone about this whole issue, because this is now an issue because of this. We see what's happening with the refugees flooding into Europe, and now there's discussions about whether they should or shouldn't come here to the United States. Just what are your thoughts about what you have seen with your eyes photographing?
I was actually working on a whole different project in Lebanon, not on the Syrian refugees. And then this was in 2014, I realized every time I'm walking on the street, they're at every street corner, and there are kids that look like my kids. I speak the same language, and but they're not at school. They're on the street, they're begging, they're shining shoes, they're selling Kleenex. So there was something heartbreaking about them. And I started talking to those kids, and they loved getting the attention, because a lot of people didn't want them there. Lebanon is a country of 4 million people, and now you have over 1 million refugees. It's destabilizing an already very poor, and but not poor, but economically and politically unstable country.
What about Professor Keylor? What about, like, your thoughts on this whole issue of the Syrian refugees? We see what's happening in Europe, and now since the attacks, the debate has started here in the United States of should we or shouldn't we allow the Syrian refugees to come? And what is key in this debate in your view?
Well, I think it's very important to remember that the perpetrators of the attack were not Syrians. They were from Belgium, some French citizens as well. So just to look at these poor Syrian refugees and assume that they're all going to be ISIS jihadists is just absolutely absurd. And I think in the United States, we've noted that a number of governors are pushing back against the president in his attempt to bring some refugees in.
Governor Baker has expressed some reservations.
Some reservations.
He's not totally against it.
That's right. He's sort of in between there, but you get people like Senator Ted Cruz saying that we should only accept Christian refugees from Syria. That kind of rhetoric has no place in our discourse.
Olivier, your thoughts on the allowing refugees to come into the United States? You've heard the debate.
Well, it's not for me to say what the United States should do, but
Well, you live here. You know.
Well, I would welcome them, certainly, as I would in France, because France, quite similarly to the United States, is a large immigration country. 1 citizen out of 4 in France has a foreign grandparent, or So we know what it is, and these people are the victims of extremism on both sides.
But what about the argument, the safety factor that you hear some of them say that if 10,000 peaceful refugees come here and one of them is a terrorist, that's one too many. Is that a valid argument?
That's a fair thing to say, indeed, because the responsibility of those who are in power is to make sure that people are safe. So it is fine to say that, but it is fine also to say we welcome them, but we have to screen, we have to make sure the number of criteria that you can implement in order to avoid this kind of...
Rania, Professor Keylor, or what do you think, that argument, that the safety argument?
These refugees are running away from the exact same thing. I mean, they're running away from ISIS, they're running away from terror.
Yeah. But if one of them is a terrorist...
Well, if 99.9% of them are okay, do we punish them all? I mean, that's...
Yeah. Well, some would say that one person can do a lot of damage.
But as Professor said, they could be ingrown.
That's true. And Professor just said that argument, again, that safety argument.
Yeah, I think the emphasis here has to be on dealing with internal threats in France. These people are in France. They're not coming from Syria, most of them. Now, occasionally, you're right, somebody might be able to come in, but there's a lot of discontented Muslim youth in France who are potentially recruitable by ISIS, and things have to be done to try to prevent
What about coming to the United States, though?
From the United States, we have...
so I guess you're in favor of them coming...
It takes about 2 years for a refugee to get approved to come to the United States, compared to a few weeks, really, in Europe. Very careful vetting. Yes, you can't be 100% certain, but it's a big effort to do so.
And we have to wrap up with one quick thought.
Yeah, regarding France, and what I'm afraid of is that we would further stigmatize the population that's already there, that's already suffering from disenfranchising, and who, for the vast majority, is fairly well integrated in the French society. Researchers say that there is only 1% of that population that is really troublesome.
Rania, I'll give you the last word very briefly.
No, I feel the same. I mean, because I see now the refugees in Lebanon. I mean, they are innocent kids, but if they stay on the streets and they're not provided with education, they're not provided with any help, they are targets to be recruited. And this breaks my heart to see that.
Okay, we'll leave it right there. Rania Matar, Olivier Appaix, and Professor Bill Keylor, thank you all for coming in, and thank you for the wonderful discussion about a very troubling time that we're all going through. Well, coming up next, the interesting story of how the community health care model has its roots in the civil rights movement more than 50 years ago. All the details right here on Urban Update.